It begins not with a number nor a test score, but with a child. William James Sidis was born in 1898 in Boston, the son of two immigrants who believed in the boundless promise of the mind. His father, Boris, was a psychologist, a man obsessed with unlocking human potential. His mother, Sarah, had studied medicine at a time when women were barely allowed into classrooms. Together, they created a house where intelligence wasn't just nurtured, it was expected. From the very beginning, William seemed less like a baby, more like a mirror reflecting his parents' greatest ambitions. By 18 months, he was reading newspapers. By 2, he could type entire letters on a typewriter. At 3, he was already fluent in English, Latin, and French. By 4, he was inventing his own languages. It sounds like myth, the kind of thing you'd read in the margins of history books, but this was no myth. He was real. A living child whose every breath carried the weight of genius. But with genius comes a question, a quiet, nagging question that would shadow William his entire life. A question as old as civilization itself. If a mind can know everything, will it ever truly belong anywhere? Most children learn their alphabet through songs and games. William learned his through the constellations. He would sit by the window at night, pointing to the stars, reciting their names not as distant ornaments, but as familiar companions. By 6, he had written 2 books, one on anatomy, another on astronomy. By 8, he had mastered multiple languages from Greek to Russian to German. His mind was a machine, absorbing knowledge at a speed that frightened even his teachers. In classrooms, he was restless. The lessons moved too slowly. The children were his age, but not his equals. He belonged nowhere, and so by 11, he entered Harvard, the youngest to ever walk its halls. Imagine him there, an 11-year-old boy carrying his books across cobblestone paths, surrounded by men twice, even 3 times his age. They stared at him as though he were an exhibit, a curiosity. And perhaps in a way, he was. But William did not see himself as a marvel. He saw himself as a student, a boy who loved mathematics, who found beauty in the cold precision of numbers. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not mock him. Numbers gave him a language the world could not twist. The press called him Harvard's Boy Wonder. Reporters trailed him across campus, desperate for a glimpse of the prodigy who solved mathematical theorems before most children learned fractions. At 12, he delivered a lecture at the Harvard Mathematical Club on 4-dimensional bodies. The room was packed. Professors sat at the edges of their seats. When he finished, there was silence. Not because they didn't understand, but because they had never expected such clarity from a child. Yet William hated the attention. Fame felt like a cage. Every article, every photograph was a chain pulling him further from himself. He longed not for applause, but for solitude, for the quiet of a room where only numbers spoke. But the world is not kind to those who refuse its spotlight. And so even at Harvard, he was not free. He was a boy trapped in the body of a man's expectations, a genius drowning under the weight of admiration. With brilliance came surveillance. His father paraded him before the press, convinced that William would be proof of his theories on human potential. But to William, it felt like betrayal. He wanted to vanish into his studies, but the world kept calling him out, like a magician forced to perform tricks he never asked to learn. By 16, he graduated with honors, but instead of celebration, there was exhaustion. He had lived a life compressed, accelerated, pushed so fast that childhood evaporated. He was, in every sense, a man without a childhood. And so the curse began, the curse of recognition. To the world, William James Sidis was no longer a person. He was an idea, a genius, a miracle, something to marvel at, not someone to understand. After Harvard, the world expected greatness. They waited for him to unlock new dimensions of mathematics, to write groundbreaking theories, to reshape science itself. But William resisted. He didn't want their expectations. He wanted peace. He attempted to teach at Rice University in Texas, but the students mocked him. They saw him not a professor, but a boy in a man's suit. They laughed at his youth, whispered about his voice, his awkwardness, his strangeness. Within a year, he resigned. It was then that the truth became clear. The brighter the flame, the harsher the shadows it casts. William had been born with a gift, but also a burden. The burden of being seen as nothing but the gift. He fled the public eye, took low-paying jobs, hid behind aliases, wrote quietly, publishing books under pseudonyms. He walked the streets of Boston like a ghost, unnoticed, unrecognized, finally, invisible. He collected streetcar transfers, studied obscure languages, wrote thousands of pages on Native American history and cosmology, works no one read. To the world, it looked like failure. The boy who once promised to change the world had disappeared into trivial pursuits. But to William, this was freedom. At last, he was living for himself, not for the crowd. But freedom has its own weight. Alone in his rented rooms, William wrestled with loneliness. He had chosen obscurity, but obscurity did not fill the emptiness left by the absence of love, of companionship. He did fall in love once with a woman named Martha, but the relationship faltered under the strain of his eccentricities, his inability to bend his world to meet hers. He lived instead with ideas, with papers, with endless writing. He wanted to be invincible, yet he longed to be seen. Not as a genius, not as a prodigy, but as a man. Sidis's story was not only one of retreat. He fought. He joined socialist protests. He was arrested during a May Day demonstration, dragged into court, mocked by the press. He stood against war, against exploitation, against the machinery of a world that demanded conformity. His mind, once hailed as the future of science, was now labeled a threat to society. But in truth, William had not changed. He was still the same boy who sought justice in numbers, in patterns, in truth. Only now, his truth put him at odds with the world. As the years passed, William's name faded. The press that once hounded him moved on. The world forgot. He became a ghost, living among the living. But in silence, he kept writing. Manuscripts filled his room, books no publisher wanted, ideas too vast, too strange, too out of step with the age. He lived on little, often working clerical jobs. From the boy who once dazzled Harvard, he had become a man filing papers in government offices. And yet, in his notebooks, universes bloomed. In 1944, at the age of 46, William James Sidis died alone in Boston. A brain hemorrhage. His obituary was short, almost dismissive. The world that once placed him on a pedestal now buried him in silence. But his story did not end there. Because William is not just a biography, he is a mirror, a reflection of how we treat genius, how we exploit brilliance, how we celebrate children not for who they are, but for what they can do for us. And in that reflection, we're forced to ask, was William James Sidis a failure, or was he a man who refused to let the world consume him? Long after his death, researchers discovered boxes of his manuscripts, essays on history, linguistics, cosmology, thousands of pages written in solitude, never meant for applause. Reading them is like entering another universe. His voice is calm, precise, patient. He writes not for fame, but for the joy of discovery. It is here, not in the headlines, that William truly lived.
Perhaps genius is not about recognition at all. Perhaps it is about this, a man in a quiet room chasing the infinite with nothing but a pen. The tragedy of William James Sidis is not that he failed, but that we failed him. We demanded spectacle when what he needed was sanctuary. We demanded breakthroughs when what he needed was love. The boy who once spoke of fourth dimensions died in a one-room apartment, his rent overdue, his body found alone. But his story haunts us because it is bigger than him. It is the story of every child burdened with expectation, every soul crushed by the weight of being different. Genius is fragile. It can illuminate the world, but it can also burn its bearer. William's gift gave him knowledge, but not wisdom to shield himself from loneliness. His mind soared, but his heart remained tethered to a world that could not understand him. And yet, perhaps that is the final lesson. The genius, like all human gifts, is not invincible. It is tender. It is human. It requires not applause, but compassion. Today, William James Sidis remains a ghost in history. His name is spoken in whispers, his story recounted as a cautionary tale. But there is another way to see him, not as a failure, but as a reminder. A reminder that the measure of a life is not in what the world applauds, but in what one dares to seek in silence. His invisible legacy is not in the theorems he left behind, but in the courage of his refusal. He would not be their circus act. He chose instead to be free. And so the story ends where it began, with a question. What does it mean to live a good life? For William James Sidis, it was not fame, not money, not even recognition. It was the quiet pursuit of knowledge, the endless search for truth. Perhaps he was not the world's greatest failure, but its greatest lesson. The genius without love is exile, that brilliance without compassion is prison, that to be human is more important than to be extraordinary. And maybe, just maybe, his story is not about him at all. Maybe it is about us, about the way we measure worth, about the way we treat those who shine too brightly, about the silence we leave behind when applause fades. Because in the end, William James Sidis was not a myth, not a prodigy, not a tragedy. He was simply a man, searching, as we all are, for a place to belong. In dusty archives, tucked away in corners of university libraries and basements, fragments of William James Sidis's life remain. Manuscripts on history, strange languages, cosmic theories no one has read. They are bound in fading covers, handwritten in a precise, elegant script, left to gather dust, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to open them. It is here, not in the headlines, not in the exaggerated newspaper clippings, that William truly exists. Every page is a conversation with himself, an echo of the boy who once stood in Harvard's lecture halls speaking of fourth dimensions with childlike clarity. The difference is that here, in his solitude, he was not performing, he was exploring. Some scholars have stumbled upon these papers over the decades, shocked by their breadth. He wrote about Native American history with a depth of care that professional historians could not match. He invented languages, not for display, but for the sheer joy of creation. He speculated about the cosmos, time, and life with the same intensity he once brought to mathematics. And yet the tragedy remains. Almost no one knows these works exist. The world remembers Sidis as a cautionary tale, the prodigy who vanished. But within these forgotten files lies another truth. The story of a man who never stopped thinking, never stopped searching, never stopped creating. When you open those pages, you can almost hear him breathing again. You can almost imagine him hunched over a desk, ink smudging his fingers, pouring out thought after thought as though time itself were chasing him. Perhaps in these lost writings, there is a second life, a quieter, truer legacy. Not the boy wonder, not the failure, but the seeker, the man who wrote for no one, and in doing so, wrote for everyone.
Every story of genius reflects back on those who tell it. When we look at William James Sidis, we are not just looking at him, we are looking at ourselves. What does it say about us that we celebrated him when he dazzled, then discarded him when he chose to live differently? What does it reveal about our hunger for spectacle, our obsession with prodigy, our unease with brilliance that refuses to serve us? Imagine for a moment that William was your child. Imagine watching him speak 10 languages before he could ride a bicycle, watching him breeze through textbooks while other children learned nursery rhymes. Would you nurture him as a gift? Or would you, like Boris Sidis, parade him as proof of your theories, a living experiment? The truth is painful. William was both miracle and mirror. His life reflects the way we consume genius, the way we idolize it until it no longer entertains us, and then let it die in silence. But the child in the mirror also reflects a deeper longing, our own. Every parent who pushes a child, every teacher who praises the gifted, every journalist who writes about the next Einstein is in some way reaching for immortality. We want to believe brilliance can defeat the fragility of life. We want to believe the genius will save us. William's story shatters that illusion. Genius, no matter how extraordinary, is still human. It aches, it breaks, it longs for love just as much as it longs for discovery. And maybe that's the true lesson of the child in the mirror. Not to worship genius, but to nurture it gently, tenderly, without the weight of our expectations. To remember that behind every prodigy is not an idea, not a number, not a legacy, but a person. William James Sidis died in 1944, his body discovered in a small Boston apartment. No crowds attended his funeral. No great scientific societies paid tribute. His name, once printed in headlines across America, faded into silence. But silence is not emptiness. Silence, too, carries weight. In that silence, questions echo louder than answers. What is the value of intelligence without happiness? What is the purpose of brilliance if it leads to isolation? What does it mean to succeed? And what does it mean to fail? The silence that remains around William's life is not absence, it is invitation. An invitation to rethink the way we measure human worth. To ask whether we should value the speed at which a child solves equations or the kindness with which they carry their lives. To wonder whether it is better to burn brightly for the world or quietly for oneself. When you stand before his story, you may feel sadness, you may even feel anger, but you may also feel something else, recognition. Because in some way, William's struggle is our struggle. The struggle to be seen, to be understood, to live not as an idea, but as a soul. The silence that remains is the space we are asked to fill, to forgive the world for how it treated him, to forgive ourselves for the way we consume brilliance, to promise, quietly, that the next child who shines too brightly will be given shelter, not a stage. And perhaps that is William's final gift. Not his IQ, not his inventions, not even his endless notebooks, but this silence. A silence that asks us to listen, not to the noise of genius, but to the fragile heartbeat of what it means to be human.